Trinity Evangelical Divinity School recently, it was it was April 8th is the announcement I'm looking at right now, said that it was essentially shuttering its doors to migrate and move to Canada, to British Columbia, to join its sister school, is it Trinity Western University. And it's kind of a shocking thing because of how important the school has been in the American evangelical movement. But I think it's also telling that it's part of a bigger trend. Probably you, Stephen, have seen, and those listening, that over the last, I would say 12 to 15 years, it seems like every 6 months a new institution is about to shut down. In fact, Gordon Conwell almost shut down. They were about to sell all their property. I'm not sure exactly what happened. They must have got some big donor. This happens in institutions too. I know that, I'm not sure on the details, but Christianity Today had a financial problem and it looked bad, and then they got a big donor. But apart from these kind of interventions, a lot of American institutions are on the decline, unfortunately. And the one thing I want to bring up, and then we can just discuss it, is there's also a migration happening. I saw this data, I think, in Religion News that said over a quarter of all seminary students are at Baptist schools right now, and that includes Orthodox Protestants, Jewish theological students. So, if you want to just kind of dial into the Protestant world, I'm sure it's higher than 25%, and that essentially means that if you're a theological student today, you're at a Baptist school like Liberty University, my alma mater, by the way. Yep, I went to Liberty. For my undergrad, and or Midwestern or Southern or whatever. But even those schools seem to be declining a little bit in sheer numbers, and Liberty seems to be taking them. So the shape of education is differently. The old institutions are sadly declining, it seems, and the new institutions, because Liberty, in a sense, is I think 1971. Wow, that popped into my mind because I was a student, but someone should Google that. That feels right as I said it out loud, but I don't know how I know that. But it's recent, right? Like, it's recent. And they're kind of taking, we might say, the market share of students, whether they're... I remember at Southern Seminary when I studied there as well. There was a Lutheran student there. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
yeah, like, why not? It's a good school. Thomas Schreiner knows the New Testament real well. Why wouldn't you go there?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. So we have, I guess, two questions really, maybe more. The future of religious education in general. Are these schools going to exist? Are they going to close down? And then the natural inertia of American kind of Baptist culture. That's just going to swallow up so many churches, right? Yeah, when I think about it, I saw the news about TEDS, and it was sad because that's a school that it's in Chicago, which is a big city, and it was broad in a sense. It had
Mm-hmm.
diversity of denomination, but it was still reliably Orthodox. Had a significant Reformed presence there. It was certainly a school that I would feel comfortable pointing people towards. Have some friends who've gone there, respect the work of someone like Kevin Van Hooser. So to see it basically moving, and I think you never know what'll happen, but I think that's probably the end of its name brand. It's just going to shut down and be absorbed by Trinity Western, and there will be certain lines of continuity, but it won't be the same. It's essentially that stage of its life is over. So that's sad. And other schools, as you mentioned, Gordon Conwell, very much struggling. We mentioned on a previous episode that Southern Seminary was forced to make drastic cuts at one point. I know the various regional campuses that have been associated with, like Westminster and other projects, have really struggled. RTS has kind of gobbled up most of those. But also for a denomination like my own, the Anglican Church North America, we don't have a specific denominational seminary. And there's a debate within that we call it province, not denomination. There is a debate, not a fight, it's not nasty, but maybe a question, conversation of where should we send our ministers?
Mm-hmm.
It's not obvious. There's no longer that default option.
Mm. I think there's the question there. The denominational schools are now interdenominational. I should probably double check this, but I'm sure that you could go to RTS and not be Presbyterian as a student,
Oh,
isn't it?
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. RTS, I'm a graduate of RTS.
yeah.
It is largely a PCA school. Most of the professors and board members and whatnot would be PCA, but it's not officially PCA. When I attended, there were still actually PCUSA faculty from the old
Mm-hmm.
main
Oh
line,
yeah, okay.
a couple of students from that tradition, a few EPC students, a bunch of Baptists, and usually there would be one Anglican.
Yeah, the token. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, and there are some exceptions. So Liberty University was one. I think the article said that it's I think like the biggest theological school currently in existence, which is kind of wild. There must be others overseas,
Yeah.
maybe just in America, because I would imagine somewhere in South Korea is probably this giant school. But
Well,
um,
but Liberty has the online branch, which is
right,
huge.
yeah, it's massive.
And yeah,
And there are places like I know that Masters Seminary, John MacArthur School, they have a pretty robust student body, even in person. I think it's still growing. So there
uh,
are exceptions to the rule. And I would also distinguish liberal arts Christian schools seem to be doing better than Bible colleges. Bible
yeah,
colleges are, as I see the news, they're the ones that are often kind of closing their doors as well. I think part of the reason is I remember talking to a friend years ago about this, and he's like, "Yeah, it's hard when I have kids. Like, do I spend, 40,000 a year to send my kids to a Bible school for what? Like, so you could send them to a
yeah.
liberal arts Christian school, and they get much of the same good Christian education, but they have, I don't know, an education degree or a history degree or an English degree or something when they come out, which makes
Right.
life a little bit more easy when it comes to pursuing vocation and job."
I think that the Christian college and seminary challenge is in some ways reflective of the basic crisis of higher education across the board.
Yeah, true.
Um, at one point in time, very few people went to college.
Mm-hmm.
Just to have a bachelor's degree placed you in an elite category. That is no longer the case. Every good, upstanding citizen almost is expected to do 4 years of college, and increasingly the pressure now is also to go on to master's programs. And so, where does a Bible college fit into that? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the name value is not going to be there. No one's going to say, "Oh, you have a degree from such and such Bible college." That's not going to get you anywhere either. So it's a question that doesn't it's not obvious why you would do that anymore. As you said, there are more Christian institutions. I think that's another thing to pause about. There was a time in which each religious denomination or tradition, they basically had one or two schools that was their school. Even in the 20th century, that when RTS was founded, the rationale, as I understand it, could be more of the story, but as I understand it, the faithful Orthodox Presbyterians, people who still believed in the Westminster Confession of Faith, they looked out at the world and they said, "Well, there's currently only one seminary that we could go to.
Hmm.
That's Westminster in Philadelphia. And you know what? We're Southerners. We need something down here. We need a second option." So can you imagine two options? There's one option, you want a second option. That was the world of the 60s and 70s. Now there's so many places you can go. Similarly, with the Anglican tradition, there was a time in which Protestant Episcopals in North America, they were looking at two or three schools. That was it. But now there are so many options, and the innate denominational loyalty is no longer what it once was. So you could actually go anywhere.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's true. I think
so
you're.
it
Sorry,
it
go on.
pushes any given school to have to defend itself. Why do you exist?
No, I think that's right, and it's part of a larger educational problem as well, and I think it's also evidenced in just how churches are working. It strikes me. I think we talked about this in an earlier episode. How the number of the number of people in mega churches is sort of declining, except for like church plants and smaller churches are kind of expanding. And it seems to me that you go to any city these days and find 25 churches that are part of 25 different associations or denominations or traditions, and they're not necessarily working together. I mean, this is why organizations like T4G or TGC or whatever kind of came to say, like, maybe we should work together somehow. But it's still kind of the reality, and you see this with institutions as well. So it is interesting to me. I don't know what that means. Does it just mean everything's going to be a little bit smaller in the future? I don't really see a reality in which we all just get together and pool our resources. It strikes me that North America, that most of us are trained to choose what is best for us, like, Amazon or Temu or whatever. Not Temu anymore, actually. It's 104% tariffs or higher or whatever it is. Whatever it is, you just kind of choose your own adventure. I think people. What was the guy from Gordon Conwell that had all those books on evangelicalism in the 90s? David Wells.
David Wells,
Yeah,
yeah.
David Wells had a lot to say about that. I think he was kind of prophetic in terms of
Sure.
church shopping, church choice. But it turns out that's the same thing with institutions of higher education as well. So
Yeah.
Trinity, even though it has this namesake, even though Gordon Conwell has a deep namesake, a decade later, people kind of forget and move on. Now, Conwell was saved, by the way.
I do think that those schools are both instructive because they were not defined enough.
What do you mean by that?
They were associated with an evangelical tradition. That's true, but they were not absolutely confessional in a way that you could readily identify. So, what kind of churchman should go to Gordon Conwell or TEDS? I mean, historically, TEDS was what, EV free, I think, but there's just not enough of an EV free world to support that long term, and so it's not clear, what kind of people should go there. You say, well, evangelicals. That's too broad, right? What does that mean? And I think TEDS was a little clearer than Gordon Conwell, but could you even say it's a place for conservative evangelicals? I think that would be something that people might question or debate. Some people would say, "Yeah, of course," and other people say, "Well, not all the way," or we're right in the middle. We're trying to hit the sweet spot, and it left a lack of definition. So why
It's an
go there when you could
interesting
go somewhere else that you
observation.
knew about?
Well, it reminds me of Calvin in Grand Rapids,
Grand
where
Rapids.
they
Yep.
recently, I think, reinforced their vision of who they are denominationally, their affiliation with the denomination, who they wanted to be. It's the
Christian Reformed Church.
Christian
Yeah.
Reformed Church.
But Calvin's a great point. I remember when I first became Reformed. I'm reading all this material. I know what Calvin means. I know that name.
Mm-hmm.
And then I meet a guy. It was actually a really really sweet guy. I was going to the University of Southern Mississippi, taking a bunch of philosophy classes, and one of my new professors, he just got the job. He came in from Calvin. So here I am, this young dork. Calvin, that's great. You're from Calvin. I'm a Calvinist. And this poor guy, he was nice. He just kind of chuckled. He said, "Oh well, I'm not." And I come to find out that Calvin does not really have much to do with Calvin. That
Interesting.
connection is fairly tenuous. And yeah, it's just kind of confusing. And you think about who founded Calvin College, Calvin University. It's a bunch of old Dutch farmers. They wanted to keep this Dutch Reformed identity and legacy alive. Um, but that's not what Calvin is anymore. Nobody thinks that that's what Calvin is. So has it maintained a fidelity to its, even if you're just thinking marketing, its brand? Like, is it the same brand? But more importantly, is it, keeping the ecclesiastical or religious communities' ideals intact? It's not clear.
It's an important question, partly because for a place like Calvin, the students that go are often sent by families that support Christian ministry, broadly defined. And so those who are willing to spend money to go to a Christian school are willing to spend money on something that's probably not as lucrative as being a lawyer or a doctor. and probably are going and spending time there because their parents are guiding, directing them, funding part of it perhaps, and it's worth making that sacrifice.
Yep.
But I've just noticed by observation there's often a divergence in a sort of a faculty leadership level of what they think they should do versus the supporter level of what they're hoping their kids will experience through going to a Christian school. And occasionally, and I don't want to name any names, but I think occasionally there's some misleading marketing from universities like that make it sound like you're going to come here for Bible, for robust theological education, but you find they'll have teachings that are historically transgressive of
Right.
creeds and confessionalism. They'll be talking about, like, let's say progressive sexuality, even though that's a new thing, as if this is like the tradition. I'm alluding specifically to Jamie Smith right now. But I just find those sorts of comments to be kind of wild, just as anyone who
Sure.
I'm not even,
And
unlike you, I'm not nearly as deep as you are in Protestant history, but just enough where I know that those sorts of statements are incongruous with the truth.
right. Well, why would you send your students to an ostensibly, your children, which to say, why would you send your children to an ostensibly Christian university, but one in which there's a high probability of sub-Christian or worldly teaching? Why not just send them to a secular school at that point, right? Why pony up all the money for this expensive private school? You could go to a state school, probably get government funding or scholarships for that, and it would have a bigger name brand in the broader world. Why not just do that? To go to a Christian school requires, as you said, that sense of sacrifice, that sense of commitment, clear vision. And I do think the future of Christian schools, is sort of two options. There's what you've talked about, the mega Baptist Borg. It just absorbs you, and you are all a part of that. Love the Baptists. Sorry, not meaning to downplay the Baptists. You guys are great, but you know what I mean, right? The giant Baptist institution that just
Wait,
sucks
did
in
you call us the
everybody.
Borg?
Yeah, you know the
Yeah.
Borg.
Resistance is futile. I agree, but
Yeah,
that's
you will be
perfect. You're right.
assimilated. Yeah, I
We
mean
will be
that's
assimilated.
liberty. Liberty is the Borg. Eventually,
100%.
every seminary professor at some point in history is going to work for liberty. That's just how it's going to happen.
Amen.
Until such a day,
And may the flames rise higher. That's their sports team.
the alternative is going to have to be clearly defined visions, institutions that really do embody something that people care about, and that is a distinctive vision and brand. Just stick with Michigan for a minute. You got Calvin, who has wandered from their founding. It's not a place that a Calvinist wants to go. Then you have Hillsdale. Hillsdale is exploding. I mean, they are building these massive buildings. They're buying other campuses. They're growing like crazy. There's nothing in Hillsdale, Michigan. You want to go out to eat at Hillsdale, it's going to be McDonald's or it's going to be the local Greasy Spoon. There's only a few stoplights. The place is tiny, but the school is just having such success. And in fact, sending folks to the administration of the federal government, crafting policy for education. They have a whole national network of schools. Now, some of that was very effective, crafty leadership who knew how to work things, but a lot of it is just they had a vision, they had a brand, it was distinctive, they did it well. That's how it worked. And you see success there.
I think so. There does seem to be a fine line, because you need to have that distinct vision and brand, but you also need to have enough people that can come and make the institution survive. So, yep. I wonder, I know you're a little, the Borg analogy is true. However, I do remember Liberty when I was there, at least when Jerry Falwell was live, did have a pretty distinctive vision of training champions for Christ to basically transform the world. And so for them, that often meant political change, but also political change and evangelistic revival. You might say moral majority and revivalism. That's actually pretty straightforward, and I think it's
Yeah.
changed. I think you're right. Like I think they've become the everything evangelical school, but at least when I was there, it still had that, like you kind of knew, like champions for Christ. That's why you're there.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the best in politics, the best in revivalism, the best in church planning or whatever. That's why you went there, to be a champion, as Jerry Falwell would say. And there's something I think that is partly why it succeeded early on. And it sort of agrees with your premise, by the way. I would say its past 10 years has been incredibly strange to me as now an outsider, but its earlier vision, I think, was really like, because you remember a lot of Baptists early on were not so driven by excellence. And Jerry Falwell was driven by excellence. It's interesting. It's not
Yeah.
always the Baptist way. Like you need to be the best, the biggest, the best, the strongest. Some of it's not always good, by the way, but he was hashtag winning before that was it Charlie Sheen or whatever. So it is a fascinating thing. That said, I think you're correct that if you just become the sort of Borg or the pool where everyone jumps into and you don't have any distinctive vision, what happens when a new Hillsdale opens up to compete with Liberty and has this distinct winning vision? Well, that seems to be happening. According to the data, I don't know precisely what's happening. According to the data, a lot of the schools like Southern Seminary and others are losing a little bit of students now. And could it just be that there are other competitors who are saying we're more distinct, we have this particular vision? Like I think a Midwestern is an example. They're seemingly trying to restore classical theology to the Baptist mind.
Yeah.
That's what I would say
Well,
about them.
yeah, I like a lot of what I've heard out of Midwestern. I like Southern a lot too, though, so I don't know all the internal
Yeah, I don't
distinctives
either.
there. I do wonder, though, with the death of the generic evangelical, but the strengthening of the Baptist, if that might not just be telling us something about America,
That
right?
everything is awesome now?
Well,
Finally?
just the evangelicals are just Baptists, right? Isn't
Yes,
that
they
the
are.
truth? Like,
Yeah.
okay, we're evangelicals. You can't pin me down. You're a Baptist.
Yeah.
just
No, I
be
think
a
it's right.
Baptist.
Evangelicals are just bad. Well, I want to clarify slightly. I mean, there's different, like the evangelical free church that you mentioned earlier. There are more independent because they can actually come. Their earlier confessions, the Savoy Declaration, which actually John Owen had a hand in apparently, and so
Hmm.
they are sort of they're independent. But what is a Baptist if not an independent movement that was Baptistic?
Savoy Savoy Declaration is just the cooler, smarter London Baptists. They're all the same world.
I think
um,
so, and I mean this is one of the reasons why I want to say this carefully, but a lot of the energy and growth and speed are happening in Baptist spaces. Hillsdale's interesting. I'd be curious about its student body, but that's also it's not necessarily a purely theological school, right? Like they're doing other things.
Right. No, I
Yeah.
think Hillsdale is much more politics and classics. I think those are the things that kind of lead the way. They were founded as a free will Baptist school. People don't know that history. They
I
were, and they were
don't know
actually
that.
they were liberal for their day. They had Frederick Douglass on campus. They're abolitionists, fought passionately in the Civil War for the Union. That mattered.
So they're liberals for
They were
sure then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they were just like Oberlin College or these other Midwestern schools at the time. And they have an up and down history. I mean, they were clearly reinvented in the late 20th century and became something different. So they're not that anymore, but that was their history. They were not really all that officially Christian for a while. Now they
Mm-hmm.
are. They are now sort of constitutionally a Christian school once more. So that's in place, but not denominational. That's right. They have many denominations, and there's a significant Roman Catholic minority presence, which probably drives a lot of what you experience there.
Well, it actually then it kind of fits into what I was asking earlier. How do you have distinctives, your brand, who you're targeting, and yet be big enough to have? So I think Hillsdale seems like it's apparently solved that equation because they have a diversity of religious traditions, and yet they have a pretty big bullseye on what they're trying to accomplish through classics and political engagement.
Yeah, I
And
think
like
for them the brand is what you think of when you say Western civilization. They are a generically, or it's not generically, they are a generally Christian bastion of Western civilization. That's what you're getting there.
well, I've thought about like my kids where I could send them, and on my short list is Redeemer University in Hamilton, Hillsdale, and I don't know fully. I haven't done enough research, but Grove City seems interesting to me as well.
Yep. I think
Um,
Grove City is good. There are actually a number of smaller institutions out there of some promise as well.
right.
Don't want to name every name, but I
No,
would
these are just
encourage
the ones
people
that
to,
are like geographically close to me. I didn't mean like,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, I encourage people to do a little digging, but it is a big question where to go, and I think seminary is also a really challenging question. Should we continue to send young men to seminary? I think that's a question you encounter often. There are denominations which more or less say no, and they produce sort of self-taught in-house ministers. Um, I think that's a mistake. We could talk more about that. I think we need to have something like seminary still, but there is a huge challenge. You've got a young guy with promise, but hey, he's got to uproot his life. He's got to move across the country, spend a ton of money to stay in a brick and mortar institution for 3 to 4 to 5 years. That's hard, and he may not come back. So I can see why people are not totally sold on it anymore.
Yeah, it strikes me that for an MDiv, we often think, well, okay, you should have maybe some life experience or some work first, then go. It almost feels like practically you should go as young as possible and then do the work stuff afterwards if you want life experience or get another degree or whatever. Because the ability to get an MDiv at 35 when you're married with kids it's hard. But if you do
Oh
it at
yeah,
21 to 24, even if you're not immediately going to be a pastor, that's fine. An MDiv is giving you the intellectual and spiritual tools to have success. It's not making you qualified to be a pastor. However, the issue is traditionally you would be sent to seminary because you were like quote unquote qualified or almost qualified, right? Like so you're discerning a call, so you go to seminary. So it makes it
yeah.
tricky, I think, for that reason too.
I have some really conflicting thoughts on that. I am a firm believer, and I tell people this. The seminaries probably don't appreciate it. You really should only go to seminary if you're trying to be a pastor. I do not see any reason to go to seminary for any other reason. If just this general kind of Christian teacher educator idea, seminary doesn't make sense. Why are you doing that? You could do that in many other colleges and institutions. Seminaries should focus on pastoral ministry. I'm a big proponent of that. But then, okay, so you're young. I agree. It's way easier when you're young. Just go ahead and go do it. But then when you're done, what can you do? 25, 26, 27. I'm trying to remember, the average age of a graduate. You're not ready to be a pastor. And few churches are going to want you at that age. They want you, 30 is kind of the magic age still. You need to be 30 to be a pastor. That's what I hear all the time. Uh,
Worked for
so it's a
Jesus. Yeah.
question. Yeah, Jesus, Joseph, it's the way it goes. So
I
where are
think
you
it's
going
a
to
live
go?
question.
What are you
I
going to
mean,
do?
I think there's alternatives if you're in life with kids now. I mean, part of what Daven Institute does is it's sort of like an ongoing education for those who want uh, deep answers to life's complexities in our rich Protestant past. So there is something there to look into in that way, but it can't really replace a traditional MDiv.
Yeah.
When I did my MDiv, I not only worked at a church, but I had 7 roommates who were uh, in ministry or ministry. There were ministry students and in ministry. So, and then there's
Mm.
more because some cycled in and out. So I was essentially a monk. We talked
Yeah.
theology and ministry all day, every day. We did stuff together. Like we would go on the weekends and like do like a church plant in a rehab center essentially and counsel like addicts. Like we just do all this stuff together,
Great.
right?
Yeah.
Or I would on
I
the
would.
weekends lead people and to like preach in like the subway station. It was just like this kind of like it was a true seminary setting.
Yeah. Now I remember on Saturdays, I would get to the library as soon as they would open, and I would stay until they closed. And I wasn't even doing projects for school. I was just trying to learn about doctrine and church history. So I would just go through a line of bookcases, grabbing things that were on a connected topic and just read them. Yeah, you're never going to get that opportunity any
Never.
other time. And it was formative. I read books at that time in history which changed me in ways I wouldn't understand until just a few years ago, even. But they were still there, working their work on me. So yeah, it was huge, very important. Um, but yeah, it's challenging to pull off. How can that be done now? Um, yeah, I would love for Davenant, our institution, I would love for us to really maybe work in and with and partner with these schools, not as replacements for them, not as competition against them, but as ways to help people that maybe can't do that school all the way, get connected and get some of the talents, or maybe do a little bit of both. Or after they've done their seminary, we can add on to that to complete that experience.
I do think there's at least so I've been working with pastors in my work with TGC for years, and one of the things I have found is that there a lot of pastors don't have access to ongoing education. That's how should I put, like, you go to denominational meetings where you have like equipping on like updates on data about church planting and stuff like that, but you don't really have a deep dive on Thomas Cranmer. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. I'm looking
Right.
at the picture behind you. So is he holding the Book of Common Prayer? Is that what that is, the BCP?
So he does have a BCP, I believe. He's got a Bible, or actually, it's the Epistle to the Romans. So it's not a full Bible; it's Epistle to the Romans. And yeah, he's showing the fruits of the Reformation. One funny thing about this painting is there's so many symbols in here. Everything on the painting means something, except the one area that would continue to become important. In this painting, he's clean shaven.
Mm.
But as soon as Henry VIII died, he grew out a massive beard. So,
Yeah, you have a picture of him somewhere. I remember I have his biography by was it McCulloch or whoever it is.
yeah,
I think he has this whole area that talks about that. But yeah, there is something there that I think is important, and I think so. Ongoing education is, I think there's a huge gap there, and
yeah,
finding like-minded people to learn from, to be sharpened from, to get excited. I know that the what's it called, that Reform Forum, the Reformed Irenics Forum that you were a part of really early on. Man, I can't remember the name of it this second. But long story short, just a bunch of people getting together, talking, learning from one another, gathering together
sure,
eventually. Like all of that is so important. I kind of use signal
sure.
groups for that today. Then we get together at like conferences or
Well,
whatever.
what you're referencing, it was simply a Google email list,
Yeah,
right?
sorry, that's what it was.
Yeah,
My brain was not connecting
yeah.
the word.
It was called the Reformed Irenics,
Okay, yeah, yeah, that's what I
and
was thinking of.
And if people don't know the back history to all that, it essentially gave birth to the Davenant Institute. It was the location where many other people came together, and then Brad Littlejohn said, "Hey, why don't we do something in real life?"
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yep.
that's how it moved off the screen into the real world.
That's still happening. It's really fast. Like those sorts of things are happening. I think they're so important. They
Yeah.
do change your life. Like I think when I got involved in the Davenant Institute, whatever it was, 5 or 6 years ago, it was largely through books and friendships. I think I knew
Hmm.
you, I knew like Ian Clary, I knew like others like that, and then it kind of irreversibly changed my life because it was the books, the ideas. I think even at that time I felt a little bit isolated because I liked deep dive in Christian history and knowing my roots, and there was very few people, and then Davenant just sort of opened that world up, and I was like, oh, there
Yeah.
are more, and they're actually everywhere. I just didn't know how to access them, and then
Yeah.
gather together in a cabin somewhere and pray and talk about stuff. It was
Right.
pretty helpful, and I think it will continue to be. I'm meeting with a group of younger guys, and we're just reading through. I think we read through actually some Davenant books like Richard Hooker and stuff like this, and we're doing Augustine's Confessions next. But just like finding these guys, we're joining a group together. Then every month we get together and just read a great book of theology and discuss it. And I think they've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it. And
Mhm.
there's something to that. It's so simple, but it reflects to me something that's been happening throughout basically all of church history. I'm not sure I could ever pinpoint a time when there wasn't something like a seminary, not as formal, of course, but like a group of people getting together to learn, to grow, to be mentored
Yeah.
in deep reflection on Christianity and
Oh
what it
yeah.
means.
This goes all the way back to the Old Testament. When you read First and Second Samuel, pay attention. Samuel has a whole band of prophets with him.
Mm,
They flock to him, they study under him, they are learning from him. And I do think that is the model that continues on. When Jesus shows up, he's actually not formally and institutionally an ecclesiastical person. He's much more like
Baptist. Sorry.
um, he's much more like this traveling prophet.
Yeah, that's right.
And he collects a school of followers, so to speak, from which he then does leave an institution, a church, and the Holy Spirit gives gifts to men, some teachers and prophets and evangelists and so forth, and eventually that standardizes into offices that we recognize today. But it was personal. The laying on of hands indicated this as well. That goes back to Elijah putting his mantle on Elisha and imparting his spirit to him. And it signifies a real unity. It's not merely a mechanical political thing. It is that I am giving what I have to you. You are a part of me and continuing my legacy and ministry and so forth. And to the extent that we lose that reality and everything's just kind of business, then it's
That's the
different.
fear. And a lot of
Yeah.
guys who say, we'll do it in in one local church of 120 people, and there's one staff pastor who's working 60 hours a week and at funerals. It's hard to actually create that unless you band
Sure.
together with larger groups of people. That's why denominational schools work. And so there needs to be some ways to continue that. Obviously, Jesus is a great model. Had apparently around 500 people that he was deeply invested in by the time of his death. And there's
Yeah.
12 and
Impressive.
70 that he was very invested in. Um, but I do think that whatever it is, whether it's formal or informal, the transference of wisdom and deep reflective thought is hugely important. I can't imagine someone like Paul being as influential as he was if he didn't know scripture as he did.
Yeah.
Like what do you talk about? If you read his letters, it's not just, you need to believe the gospel. It is a deep reflection on the meaning of scripture and its scope and sequence.
Yeah. And Paul had this history. He studied under Gamaliel.
Yes.
He's at least conversant in Stoic philosophy. And if you do a little research into his hometown, you find out it was a hub for
Mm-hmm.
Stoic philosophers. He was smart, he was educated. It's true the New Testament says most of the apostles weren't. And people were surprised when they could tell that these unlettered men were so eloquent. But Paul was. He was learned, he was lettered to a certain degree. And I do think that's why he was chosen to be this international apostle who writes the majority of the theological letters and found so many churches across ultimately
Right.
Christendom.
And arguably, the unlettered apostles became lettered. I mean, you just got to think of First, Second, Third John, the Gospel of John, Revelation. These are not works of a an unskilled thinker. Um,
The book of Revelation is one of the most complicated pieces of literature in all of the scriptures. So much symbolism and numerology and all of biblical theology spiraling around. It's very impressive.
on Monday night, for almost 3 hours, I taught through the entire book of Revelation, just from almost cover to cover, because we did the first 3 chapters the first week. The second week was 4 to 22.
Yeah.
Well, I think then we can kind of conclude with the future of education. I think there are some kind of sad realities where some of these strong institutions are closing, and I don't think that trend's going to change in the near term. I do
No.
think there are students and there is a need for ongoing education, so there is an opportunity. But I really hope that those who fill that opportunity are those who are deeply reflective of the Christian tradition, and in
Yeah.
particular about God and Christ. I talked earlier about being on YouTube. There's so many influential people in the new public sphere, and they are not classically Trinitarian. And I just see younger people are not reading as much for their theological formation, but are watching or listening. And a lot of the content that gets a lot of views and interaction is, frankly, barely Christian.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. There's the barely Christian element, even though within the Christian sphere, there's the barely sort of accurate aspects.
That's even,
Um,
yes.
did you see that debate that's being passed around where these two traveling apologetics guys go to Harvard or MIT, and
Yeah.
they get kind of schooled by
Yeah, the
this
Cavitals, father and
yeah
son, Cliff and his son, I don't remember.
the Orient, I think he's Oriental Orthodox, and he schools them on the real presence. But I actually watched the video, and that guy wasn't actually producing technically accurate descriptions either. You know, he said things like the church fathers all taught that the sacrament was the actual body and blood of Christ. Actual is not a technical term. The all of the church fathers, they don't simply teach one in a singular statement. There's a lot of details to that, but the apologists didn't. They weren't able to talk about that on the fly. And now you get this viral video going around, which it's true. He does school them in that video, no doubt about it. But you would be foolish to just take his talking point and think that was some really robust historic expression of a doctrine.
Right.
It's really not. And if you
No.
latched onto him, you'd be not much better off as far as a deep and articulate expression of the doctrines of the
I
sacraments.
think that's right. I think it's a kind of that's video's a bit unfortunate because I think I believe the father's Cliff and the son maybe got them backwards, but they're generally good at sharing the gospel. I've watched some of it, like they're allies, if that makes sense. But
Hmm.
yeah, I saw some of that video and it was just kind of like a bit disappointing because they were kind of talking over the guy who seemed really
Yeah.
respectful, and he was, I mean, the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. I mean, the Bible. I
Yeah.
just think at one point I don't understand why if evangelicals feel like they need to just not say what the Bible says. Paul says give thanks. That's the verb for Eucharist. It's just, anyways.
Yeah.
At one
But
point,
yeah, the viral video phenomena is not catechesis.
no,
It isn't. And we have to do better than that. I know the viral video will continue to be here. Teaching by YouTube is not going away, but we've got to find a way to do something a little deeper, a little more substantial, with more integrity.
right. I agree. I mean, I think that's important. I mean, obviously, you're investing in the Davin Institute like I am. I think that's a key part of what we're attempting to do is don't keep the cookies at the bottom shelf. Invest in in-person retreats, in-person events, deep theological reflection, ongoing education, producing of books even when the reading audience is declining, realistically. I don't think it means don't do YouTube videos, but I wouldn't say that was the only thing that you should do. They are
Right.
maybe 6% of catechesis, if you want to put it that way, and really shouldn't be the whole thing. TikTok is interesting as well. There's a huge. You don't want to watch the Christian videos on TikTok, Stephen, but I watched one today, and it was amazing about the genealogy of Genesis 5, how each of the names in the genealogy has a Hebrew meaning, and it actually prophesies of Christ. And, I'm an Old Testament guy and Hebrew guy, and I loved it, but I don't think it was at all correct. But it was confidently said. It's like,
Entertaining but wrong.
yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, I should probably look into it before, but it sounded so outlandish that I couldn't possibly write. But I probably should still look at all the names and see if
Yeah.
there's even something to it. It feels like it can't be, but before I get very strong, I should do my due diligence. Any last words on the future of theological education and the story of TEDS?
Yeah, well, I would love to see some of these ecclesiastical institutions prosper, stand strong. I think we need to support them, but I think that requires them to really pick a brand, stake out a vision, be clear about it, hold to it, and then we have to find ways to make it viable, supporting it, paying for it, providing for obvious lanes of vocation. And I don't know all the answers to that. So
The money thing is is tricky because what we give money to isn't always for intellectual deepening or spiritual deepening for that matter. We usually give money to what gets results in terms of material results. So that's also a modern day challenge. How to persuade people to give money to something that doesn't produce financial dividends, we might say.
Mm. All right. Well, Wyatt, that's why we pay you the big bucks.
Thank you. I'll solve the problem. All right. Talk to you next time, Stephen.
All right. See ya.